Welcome back to HFY Soundscape, the best channel for HFY sci-fi tales.
They say that in space, no one can hear you scream. But they never tell you that in a room full of Ethel Guardians, everyone can hear you think. Especially if those thoughts are loud, desperate, and in my case dangerously personal. The High Council chamber of Ethelis IV was a cathedral of glass and light, suspended over a gas giant that glowed like a dying ember. Captain Silas Thorne stood at the center of it, his dress uniform feeling like a straitjacket. For 15 years, Silas had been the United Earth Federation's Iceman. He was the negotiator who didn't flinch, the soldier who didn't bleed, and the diplomat who never, ever let his heart rate rise above 60 beats per minute. He had spent months studying the Ethel Guardians. He knew their history of isolation, their elegant biology, and most importantly, their terrifying empathic abilities. To an Ethel Guardian, an emotion wasn't a feeling. It was a broadcast. Silas had spent weeks in a sensory deprivation tank, practicing the void state. He had to be a blank slate. If he showed even a flicker of hostility or fear, the peace treaty was dead. Earth would be back to the brink of a war it couldn't win. He adjusted his collar, his skin cool, his mind a desert of nothingness. He was ready, or so he thought. Then, the great doors swung open. The Empress Lyra didn't walk. She seemed to displace the very air around her. She was tall, her skin the color of starlight on water, draped in silks that shifted hues based on the mood of the room. Silas felt the collective breath of the room hitch. He kept his mind blank, void, silence, empty space. He repeated the mantra like a prayer. He didn't look at her eyes. He looked at her crown, then her shoulder. But then, she stopped directly in front of him. A scent like ozone and jasmine hit his senses. For a split second, Silas Thorne, the Iceman of Earth, made a fatal mistake. He looked up. He met her eyes, irises the color of nebulas, swirling with a deep, ancient intelligence. In that heartbeat, the void shattered. It didn't just crack. It exploded into a billion pieces. The Iceman didn't just feel a spark, he felt a supernova. A visceral, soul-crushing wave of attraction hit him so hard, it physically made him stumble. It was love at first sight, not as a cliché, but as a biological catastrophe. Hold on before we get into the real stuff. I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. The room went silent. The other Ethel Guardian delegates froze. Their head crests began to glow a violent pulsing violet. They felt it. The broadcast Silas was putting out wasn't a whisper. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated adoration. Empress Lyra tilted her head, her expression unreadable. She stepped closer, her own empathic field overlapping with his. The air between them began to hum with static. Silas realized with a jolt of horror that he wasn't just feeling love. He was projecting it with the intensity of a sun. He tried to pull back to rebuild the wall, but it was too late. The Empress leaned in, her lips inches from his ear. The entire room held its breath. If she took this as an insult, the human fleet in orbit was as good as dust. She whispered 4 words that changed the course of human history. Your heart is very loud. Silas felt his face burn, a heat he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. He looked at the human delegation behind him. His commanding officer looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Silas turned back to the Empress, his mind racing. He had to fix this. He had to apologize. He had to be a professional. But instead, his treacherous brain projected a single vivid image of him holding her hand beneath an Earth sunset. The Empress gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in recorded history, a silver blush crept up the neck of an Ethel Guardian royal. She didn't turn away. She didn't call the guards. Instead, she did something much worse. The Empress didn't recoil in disgust. She didn't call for Silas's execution for the mental intrusion. Instead, she stepped even closer, entering the intimate space that no human had ever been permitted to occupy. Her eyes, those swirling nebulas of light, searched his face with a terrifying intensity. "Captain Silas Thorne," she said, her voice vibrating not just in his ears, but directly in the center of his chest. "You were sent here to negotiate a trade of minerals and star charts. Why is it, then, that your spirit is offering me something entirely different?" The silence in the hall was deafening. Silas could feel the sweat beginning to beat at his hairline. Behind him, he heard the faint, rhythmic tapping of General Vance's finger against a holster, a nervous habit that meant the human delegation was seconds away from a full-scale panic. Silas knew he was failing his species. He was the vanguard of Earth, and he was standing there, mentally naked, vibrating with an attraction so potent it was likely interfering with the station's communication arrays. "Empress," Silas managed to croak out, his voice cracking. "My apologies. The atmospheric pressure of your world is clearly affecting my internal regulation." It was a pathetic lie. Ethel Guardians were living lie detectors. Lyra let out a sound that was half sigh, half musical chord. She raised a slender, three-fingered hand and placed it, featherlight, against the center of his chest right over his thundering heart. The moment her skin touched his uniform, a shockwave of shared sensation ripped through him. He saw flashes of her life, the crushing weight of a crown, the loneliness of a mind that could hear everyone but find no one who truly understood. She saw the cold steel of starships, the isolation of command, and the sudden blinding light that had filled his vision the moment she walked through those doors. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was a bridge. "The Iceman of Earth," she whispered, a small knowing smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That is what your people call you. Yet within you, I find a fire that could restart a dying star. Is this how all humans feel, or are you a defect in your design?" "I'm just a man, Empress," Silas replied, finding a sudden desperate surge of honesty. If he was going to go down, he might as well go down speaking the truth. "And I have never seen anything like you in the entire galaxy." The purple glow on the heads of the Ethel Guardian counselors shifted to a soft, shimmering pink, the color of curiosity and amusement. They weren't angry, they were fascinated. Humans were usually seen as rigid, warlike, and emotionally stunted. Silas was inadvertently proving that beneath the steel exterior, humanity possessed a chaotic, raw emotional power that the Ethel Guardians found intoxicating. But the moment of connection was shattered by a sudden shrill alarm. The station's lights flickered, turning a harsh warning red. "Empress, the orbital sensors!" A counselor shouted, his voice losing its melodic quality. "A cloaked vessel has breached the inner perimeter." "It's not human, and it's not Ethel Guardian." Silas snapped back into soldier mode instantly. His training took over, dampening the roar of his heart. He looked at the holographic display in the center of the room. A jagged black ship was cutting through the gas giant's rings, heading straight for the station. The Korth, a scavenger race that thrived on the chaos of failed negotiations. They had been waiting for a slip-up, a moment of weakness. "They think we're distracted," Silas growled, turning to his team. "Vance, get the shuttle prepped. We need to get the Empress to the secure bunker." But Lyra didn't move toward the bunker. She looked at the screen, then back at Silas. The warmth in her eyes was replaced by a cold, regal fury. "They dare interrupt this communion?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. "They think a human's heart is a weakness to be exploited." She turned to Silas, and for a moment, the air around her began to shimmer with raw, empathic energy. "Captain Thorne, you claim to feel for me. Show me. Show the galaxy what a human does when the object of his focus is threatened." The challenge was clear. This wasn't just a battle for the station anymore. It was a test of the very soul of humanity. Silas gripped the hilt of his ceremonial sidearm. "With pleasure, Your Majesty." But as he turned to face the viewscreen, he realized the Korth weren't just attacking. They had sent a boarding party. And they were already inside the hall. The air in the chamber didn't just grow cold, it curdled. The Korth didn't use doors. They used breach charges that tore through the reinforced glass of the upper balconies, raining shards of crystalline silica down like lethal snow. 5 of them descended on Graveline's monstrous insectoid shadows with chitinous plating that shimmered with a greasy, oil-slick sheen. They were built for one thing, the harvest of biological life. Before the first Ethel Guardian Guard could even raise a sonic lance, Silas was moving. His body reacted before his conscious mind could even process the threat. It was the human factor, that unpredictable split-second transition from diplomat to predator, that the rest of the galaxy found so terrifying. He didn't reach for his gun first. He reached for the Empress. With a strength that surprised even him, Silas swept Lyra off her feet, pivoting his body to shield her with his own armored back, just as a Korth disruptor beam scorched the air where she had been standing. The heat of the bolt singed his uniform, the smell of burning fabric filling his nostrils. "General Vance, Pattern Delta," Silas roared. The human delegation, once looking like stiff bureaucrats, transformed in an heartbeat. They didn't retreat. They formed a tight, lethal semicircle around the Empress and the Ethel Guardian Council. While the Ethel Guardians were paralyzed by the sudden psychic shock of the Korth's murderous intent, the humans were in their element. Humans didn't need to sense emotions to fight. They thrived in the chaos. "You're hurt," Lyra whispered, her hands gripping Silas's shoulders. Through the contact, he felt her terror, but more than that, he felt her astonishment. To her, Silas's mind had gone from a chaotic storm of love to a laser-focused beam of protective rage. It was a transition so fast, so violent. It was like watching a sun turn into a black hole. "Stay behind me," Silas commanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl. He drew his sidearm, a heavy U-Eve pulse pistol. Unlike the elegant musical weapons of the Ethel Guardians, the human gun made a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. Thump, thump, 3 shots. 3 Korth warriors were knocked backward, their kinetic shields shattering under the sheer primitive force of human ballistics. The Korth hadn't accounted for the humans being this fast. They hadn't accounted for the Iceman having a heart full of fire. One of the Korth, a massive brute with a jagged vibroblade, lunged from the balcony, aiming directly for Silas's head. Silas didn't flinch, he didn't move away. He stepped into the strike, catching the creature's wrist with a sickening crunch of chitin. The Empress let out a sharp telepathic gasp. She wasn't just watching the fight. She was feeling Silas's adrenaline. She was tasting the iron in his blood and the absolute unwavering certainty in his mind that he would die before a single claw touched her. But the Korth weren't alone. As Silas slammed his elbow into the creature's face, he looked up and saw the secondary wave. Dozens of them were swarming the outer hull, and the station's internal gravity began to fail. "They're trying to vent the atmosphere," Vance shouted over the comms. "Silas, we can't hold the chamber. We have to move." Silas looked at Lyra. Her eyes were wide, swirling with a mixture of fear and something else. An intense, growing connection to the man standing in the center of the carnage. "Can you run?" Silas asked. The Empress stood tall, her silver blush fading into a look of regal defiance. "I am the Empress of the Ethelgard. I do not run, but I will follow you." Silas grabbed her hand, his fingers locking with hers. The psychic feedback was a white-hot jolt of electricity. In that moment, he didn't care about treaties or mineral rights. He cared about the woman whose soul was currently screaming in harmony with his. They sprinted toward the emergency lift, but as the doors began to hiss open, a Korth shadow operative shimmered into existence right in front of them, its blade leveled at Lyra's throat. Silas was too far to shoot. He was too slow to strike. And then, something impossible happened. The Empress didn't wait for Silas to save her. She reached out her free hand, and the air in the hallway turned into a solid wall of kinetic force, fueled by the raw emotion she was drawing directly from Silas's heart. The Korth operative wasn't just pushed, it was erased. Lyra leaned against Silas, her breathing heavy, her eyes locked on his. "Your love," she panted, "is quite a potent weapon, Captain." But the floor beneath them suddenly buckled. A massive explosion rocked the station's spine, and the lights went pitch black. In the darkness, Silas heard the sound of hundreds of scuttling legs. They were surrounded. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light, it was a physical weight. On Concordia Station, when the power fails, the silence that follows is the sound of the abyss. But Silas Thorne didn't need sight. He had spent years training for blind engagement scenarios, and more importantly, he had a literal beacon of starlight standing right next to him. Lyra's skin began to glow, a soft, pulsing bioluminescence that bled from her veins. It was the Ethelgardian response to extreme stress, a visual manifestation of her heightened state. In the eerie, flickering violet light, Silas could see the Korth closing in. They were crawling along the ceiling, their multi-jointed limbs clicking against the carbon fiber plating like 1,000 knitting needles. "How many?" Lyra whispered, her hand trembling in his. "Too many for a fair fight," Silas muttered, checking the charge on his pulse pistol. "Good thing humans don't play fair." He felt a ripple of amusement through their mental link. Even in the face of death, his dry, Terran bravado was leaking into her mind, acting like a stabilizer. He was her anchor, she was his light. "Vance, do you copy?" Silas tapped his comms, static. The Korth were jamming everything. "General?" Nothing. They were cut off. The human delegation and the Ethelgardian Council were likely fighting their own battles in the lower tiers. Silas and Lyra were alone in the spine of the station, with a legion of scavengers between them and the escape pods. One of the Korth dropped from the ceiling, landing with a heavy thud. It was a stalker larger than the others, with twin mandibles dripping with neurotoxin. It didn't charge. It waited. It was sensing the air, looking for the telltale vibration of fear. "Silas." Lyra's voice was a ghost of a sound. "It's looking for my heartbeat. It feeds on the frequency of terror. Then give it something else to listen to," Silas growled. He didn't wait for the creature to move. He charged. It was a suicidal move by any alien standard. No one charged a Korth stalker in close quarters, but Silas Thorne wasn't just a soldier. He was a man fueled by a protective instinct that had been overclocked by the Empress's presence. He tackled the beast, the sheer momentum carrying them both into the reinforced wall. He felt his ribs crack under the pressure of the creature's chitinous chest plate. Pain flared white-hot and blinding. Immediately Lyra screamed. Not with her voice, but with her mind. Because they were linked, she felt the snap of his bones as if they were her own. But instead of collapsing, the shared pain acted like a catalyst. The Empress's glow intensified until it was blinding. She raised both hands, and the shadows in the hallway seemed to bend toward her. "Get away from him." A wave of pure telekinetic pressure erupted from her. It wasn't a focused strike. It was a scream made manifest. The stalker was flattened against the bulkhead, its internal organs rupturing under the psychic weight. The other Korth, sensing the sudden, overwhelming power, hissed and retreated into the vents. Silas slumped to the floor, gasping for air. The Empress was at his side in an instant, her hands glowing a warm, soothing amber. She pressed them against his chest, and he felt the jagged edges of his ribs settle. The pain didn't vanish, but it became a dull, manageable hum. "You are a fool, Silas Thorne," she whispered, her eyes wet with silver tears. "You felt my fear, and you tried to take it all for yourself. Standard operating procedure," Silas joked weakly, though his heart was still racing. "We humans are very protective of our diplomatic assets." Lyra leaned her forehead against his. The connection was so deep now that he could feel her thoughts weaving into his. She wasn't seeing a diplomatic asset. She was seeing a man who had looked at a goddess and saw a person. A man who loved her before he even knew her name. "The pods are 500 meters down this corridor," she said, her voice regaining its regal steel. "But the Korth have blocked the primary life support junction. If we don't clear it, the entire station will depressurize in 10 minutes. Silas stood up, leaning on her for a brief second before finding his balance. He looked down the dark hallway. He could hear them. The Korth were regrouping, calling for reinforcements. "Then we don't go to the pods," Silas said, sliding a fresh thermal clip into his pistol. "We go to the junction. There are dozens of them there," Lyra warned. "And only one of you." Silas looked at her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of starlight-colored hair behind her ear. "You're forgetting, Empress. There isn't just one of me. As long as you're reading my mind, you'll know exactly what I'm going to do before I even do it." He grabbed her hand, locking their fingers together again. "Let's show them why you should never break a human's heart." They began to move, but as they rounded the corner, Silas froze. The floor ahead wasn't just covered in Korth. It was covered in something much worse. A Korth queen, and she was already feeding on the station's core. The Korth queen was a nightmare rendered in wet, pulsating obsidian. She was 10 times the size of her warriors. Her bloated abdomen fused directly into the station's power conduits, draining the lifeblood of the ship to fuel her own horrific reproduction. Around her, hundreds of translucent eggs shimmered in the dim light, each containing a twitching larva hungry for its first meal. The air here was thick with a cloying, sweet rot. Silas felt his gorge rise, but the Empress's hand tightened in his. Her telepathic aura was no longer a soft glow. It was a sharpened blade of sapphire light. "She is consuming the station's consciousness," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of revulsion and fury. "Every digital record, every environmental control. She is eating it all to build her hive." The queen's head, a massive crown of serrated bone and dozens of milky eyes, swiveled toward them. She didn't make a sound, but a psychic screech tore through Silas's mind, a wave of pure, unfiltered hunger that threatened to bring him to his knees. It was a psychic static meant to paralyze prey. But Silas Thorne wasn't prey. Because he was linked to Lyra, her presence acted like a firewall. The queen's mental assault hit her sapphire shield and shattered. Silas felt the impact, but he channeled that energy, turning the mental pressure into physical momentum. "Lyra, the conduit's behind her!" Silas shouted, pointing to the glowing blue pipes that fed the station's oxygen scrubbers. "If we rupture those, we can freeze this entire room in seconds. But we have to get past her guards first." As if on cue, the shadows around the queen detached themselves. 6 Praetorians, armored behemoths with blades for limbs, leaped from the darkness. "Focus on the queen, Silas," Lyra cried out. Her eyes began to burn with an internal fire. "I will handle the children. Give me your strength." Silas didn't hesitate. He didn't just give her his strength. He opened every floodgate of his psyche. He thought of his home on Earth, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of a city waking up, and finally, the overwhelming, irrational surge of love he felt for the woman standing beside him. He pumped those emotions into the link-like fuel into a jet engine. Lyra gasped, her body arching as she absorbed the raw human intensity. She raised her arms, and a shockwave of kinetic energy erupted from her, catching the leaping Praetorians mid-air and slamming them against the ceiling with the force of a falling moon. Silas didn't watch the carnage. He moved. He sprinted toward the queen, sliding under a massive scything limb that missed his head by a fraction of an inch. He was a blur of motion, his pulse pistol barking in a steady, rhythmic cadence. Each shot was aimed at the queen's vulnerable eye clusters. The queen roared a sound that vibrated the very deck plates. She swung a heavy, spiked tail at Silas, catching him in the side and launching him across the room. He hit a stack of storage crates with a bone-jarring thud. His vision swam. The world turned gray. "Silas!" He felt Lyra's panic. It was like a cold bucket of water over his soul. He forced his eyes open, just in time to see the queen looming over him, her mandibles opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. But something was wrong. The queen hesitated. She wasn't looking at Silas. She was looking at the Empress. Lyra was walking toward her, her feet barely touching the ground. She wasn't just glowing anymore. She was radiating a field of such intense emotional purity that the Queen's hunger seemed to recoil. "You are a void," Lyra said, her voice echoing with 1,000 voices, the voices of everyone she had ever sensed. "But he is a sun." She reached out and touched the Queen's armored snout. For a second, there was total silence. Then, the Queen's eyes turned from milky white to a brilliant, searing violet. She began to thrash, not in anger, but in agony. She couldn't handle the human emotion Lyra was funneling into her. The Queen was built for hunger and cold logic. The concept of sacrificial love was like acid to her nervous system. "Now, Silas," Lyra screamed. Silas pulled himself up, ignoring the stabbing pain in his side. He pulled a high-yield thermal detonator from his belt, primed it, and looked at the primary oxygen conduit. But as he prepared to throw it, he saw something that stopped his heart. The conduit wasn't just a pipe. It was the only thing keeping the air flowing to the lower levels where General Vance and the rest of the survivors were trapped. If he blew it, the Queen died, but his people died with her. He had 3 seconds to choose. The weight of 1,000 lives pressed down on Silas's thumb as it hovered over the detonator's trigger. Through the mental link, Lyra felt his agonizing hesitation. She saw the images of General Vance, the young ensigns, and her own Ethel Guardian advisors gasping for air in the decks below. "Silas," she whispered into his mind, her voice a calm harbor in the middle of his mental storm. "The humans. They have a saying, between a rock and a hard place, but they also have a habit of breaking the rock." Silas's eyes narrowed. He looked at the Queen, whose body was convulsing as it tried to purge the Empress's psychic overload. Then he looked at the conduit. He didn't see a pipe anymore. He saw a conductor. "I'm not going to blow the conduit," Silas grunted, his voice thick with physical pain. "I'm going to use it." He didn't throw the detonator at the pipe. Instead, he lunged forward, grabbing a discarded sonic lance from a fallen Ethel Guardian guard. With a desperate heave, he jammed the lance directly into the Queen's pulsating abdomen. The part fused to the station's power grid. "Lyra, now, push everything you have into the lance." The Empress understood instantly. She didn't just send a wave of emotion. She channeled the entire psychic feedback loop of the station, the fear of the survivors, the rage of the humans, and the singular burning love she felt for Silas into the sonic lance. The weapon wasn't designed to hold that kind of power. It began to vibrate so violently that the air around it hummed. The Queen realized too late what was happening. She tried to detach, but she was hardwired into the station. The psychic energy traveled through the lance into the Queen, and then directly into the station's power grid. It didn't destroy the life support. It acted like a massive jumpstart. A surge of pure, white energy backflowed into the Queen's hive mind. Silas watched as the eggs around the room shattered, the larvae neutralized by the overwhelming frequency of feeling. The Queen let out one final silent shriek before her obsidian skin cracked, light leaking from the fissures like a star-going supernova. The explosion wasn't fire, it was a pulse of light. Silas was thrown backward again, but this time, soft arms caught him. He felt the cool, starlit skin of the Empress against his face. The room was silent. The Queen was a hollowed-out shell, and the Korth warriors in the vents had either been fried by the pulse or had fled into the void. The lights on the station flickered, then stabilized into a warm, steady gold. The hum of the oxygen scrubbers returned to a healthy rhythm. "Did we?" Silas coughed, tasting copper. "You saved them," Lyra said, her eyes shimmering with an emotion so complex Silas couldn't even name it. "You saved everyone. And you did it without becoming the monster they feared humans could be." She pulled him closer, her forehead resting against his. For a moment, the war, the station, and the galaxy didn't exist. There was only the rhythm of two hearts, beating in a synchronization that defied every law of xenobiology. But the moment of peace was short-lived. A crackle came through Silas's earpiece. "Thorne? Silas, do you read me? This is Vance." The general's voice was ragged but alive. The Korth ships are retreating, but we've got a problem. A heavy UEF cruiser just jumped into the system. They're locking onto the Empress's signature. Silas's blood ran cold. The UEF cruiser, the Iron Duke. Its commander was Admiral Kincaid, a man who believed that the only good alien was one under a microscope. "Vance, tell them to stand down," Silas commanded, struggling to his feet. "The Empress is an ally. We just fought alongside her." "I tried, Silas," Vance replied, his voice dropping to a grim whisper. "But Kincaid says he has orders from High Command. They aren't here to rescue us. They're here to secure the asset. They think she's a weapon, Silas. And after that light show you two just put on, they have proof." Silas looked at Lyra. She had heard it all through the link. The silver glow of her skin dimmed to a dull, heartbroken gray. "So," she said softly, "the Iceman was just the bait. And now the hunters have arrived." The silence that followed Vance's warning was sharper than any Korth blade. Silas looked at Lyra, and for the first time, the mental link felt like a wound. He could feel her withdrawal, a cold, sudden wall of glass rising between their minds. She wasn't just afraid. She felt betrayed. "Lyra, listen to me," Silas said, stepping toward her, but she recoiled. Her silver skin, once radiant with the warmth of their shared battle, was now the color of a frozen moon. "Was it all a calculation, Silas?" Her voice was a hollow chime. "Did your High Command know that a human heart, properly provoked, could act as a battery for my power? Was I just a research project to see how far an Ethelgardian Empress could be pushed?" "No," Silas's shout echoed off the scorched bulkheads. "I didn't know they were coming. I was sent here to sign a treaty, not to trap you. You felt my mind, Lyra. You felt my heart. You know I'm not lying. I know what you felt," she whispered, her eyes swirling with a stormy dark violet. "But I also know what humans are capable of. You are a species that masters everything you touch. And right now, your people want to master me." Outside the reinforced viewports, the Iron Duke loomed, a brutal slab-sided mountain of gray steel and railgun batteries. It made the elegant Concordia Station look like a glass ornament. A flight of tactical boarding craft detached from the cruiser's hangar, burning through the vacuum toward their position. Silas tapped his comms, his voice dropping into a register that made even the Empress flinch. It was the tone of a man who had decided to commit treason. "General Vance, listen carefully. Switch to the encrypted Ogun channel. Do not let Kincaid's birds land in this bay. Tell them the area is still hot with Korth biocontaminants. Lie to them, General." "That's an order." "Silas," Vance's voice crackled through the static, "Kincaid is a 5-star admiral. If I block his landing, he'll have us both court-martialed before the sun sets. If he lands," Silas growled, looking directly into Lyra's eyes, "there won't be a peace to come home to. There will only be a war that burns the Orion Arm to cinders. Do you want that on your conscience?" A long silence followed. Then, "Copy that, Captain. I'll tell them the Queen's death released a neuropathogen. But you better have a plan. Silas, you have 10 minutes before they stop caring about the pathogen and start shooting." Silas turned back to Lyra. The glass wall in her mind hadn't vanished, but it had cracked. She was watching him, her head tilted, sensing the absolute, terrifying sincerity of his rebellion. "You would defy your own kind?" she asked. "For an alien you met less than an hour ago?" "I'm not doing it for an alien," Silas said, reaching out, his hand trembling slightly. He didn't grab her. He waited for her to bridge the gap. "I'm doing it for the woman who read my soul and didn't look away." Lyra stared at his hand. Slowly, painfully, she reached out. The moment their skin touched, the link re-established itself with the force of a physical blow. Silas didn't hide anything. He showed her his willingness to lose his rank, his home, and his life to keep her safe. She let out a shaky breath, her glow returning, faint but steady. "They are coming to the primary airlock. If we stay here, we are cornered. But there's a secret path vein of the station that even the Korth missed. Where does it lead?" Silas asked. To the core of the gas giant below, she said, a cryptic light appearing in her eyes. The Ethel Guardians didn't build this station just for diplomacy, Silas. It is a gateway. But to open it, I need more than just your love. What do you need? She looked at the Iron Duke closing in on the sensors. I need your trust. Your absolute, blind trust. Because where we are going, your human logic will tell you that we are dying. Before Silas could ask what she meant, the station groaned. A proximity alert blared. Kincaid's boarding craft had ignored the warning. They were breaching the hull. No more time, Lyra said. She grabbed his hand and began to run, not toward the escape pods, but toward the very center of the station's gravity well. As they sprinted, the floor behind them exploded. Men in heavy tactical armor, bearing the seal of the United Earth Federation, stormed into the corridor. Captain Thorne! Stand down and release the target. The lead soldier shouted through a megaphone. Silas didn't look back. He leaped with Lyra into the darkened maintenance shaft, falling into a blackness that felt bottomless. The fall wasn't a drop. It was a transition. As Silas and Lyra plummeted through the maintenance shaft, the metal walls of the station seemed to dissolve into a kaleidoscope of shifting geometric shadows. The roar of the HFY soldiers and the hiss of breaching charges faded, replaced by a low, rhythmic thrum, the heartbeat of the station itself. Don't let go. Lyra's voice echoed in his mind, clearer than any physical sound. Silas gripped her hand with a strength that would have crushed human bone, but her starlit skin felt more resilient than steel. They weren't hitting the bottom. Instead, the gravity began to invert, swirling them into a massive, shimmering chamber at the very base of Concordia. This was the Ethel Guardian core, a sphere of liquid light that acted as a gravitational anchor for the entire station. They landed on a platform of translucent glass that overlooked the swirling, violent storms of the gas giant below. The sky of the planet was a bruised purple, lightning arcing between clouds the size of continents. They are right behind us, Silas said, checking his HUD. He could feel the vibrations of the UEF tactical boots on the levels above. Lyra, whatever you're going to do it now. The Empress stepped to the edge of the platform. She looked out at the chaos of the planet below, her silhouette framed by the cosmic storm. This station is not just a meeting place, Silas. It is a tuner. It aligns the frequency of the mind with the frequency of the universe. My people used it to travel without ships. But it requires a dual harmonic. A what? Silas asked, moving to her side. A bridge between two worlds, she explained, turning to him. Her eyes were no longer just nebulas. They were burning white stars. A Thelgardian spirit and human will. Alone, I can only hide. Alone, you can only fight. Together, we can transcend. Above them, the ceiling buckled. The UEF, Sickerbots, began to descend on fast ropes, their red targeting lasers dancing across Silas's chest. Captain Thorne. Admiral Kincaid's voice boomed over the station's internal speakers. You are committing an act of high treason against the Human Federation. Release the Empress and step away. She is a biological hazard of the highest order. If you do not comply, we are authorized to use lethal force on both of you. Silas looked at the red dots on his uniform. He looked at the soldiers, his brothers in arms, who were now looking at him through the visors of their helmets as if he were a stranger. Then he looked at Lyra. They don't understand, Silas whispered. They only see what they can control, Lyra replied. She reached out, her fingers interlacing with his. Do you trust me, Silas? Even if it feels like your heart is stopping. Even if the world tells you that you are fading away. Silas closed his eyes. He let the Iceman melt away entirely. He let the fear of court-martial, the fear of death, and the fear of the unknown evaporate. He focused on one thing, the warmth of the woman standing next to him. With everything I am, he said. The soldiers opened fire. A hail of pulse rounds and kinetic slugs screamed through the air, but they never hit. The moment the triggers were pulled, Lyra and Silas vanished into a blinding pillar of violet light. The energy didn't just push the bullets away, it folded the space around them. Silas felt a sensation of being stretched across the stars. His lungs felt like they were filled with liquid gold. He saw the history of Earth, the wars, the music, the laughter colliding with the ancient silent wisdom of the Ethelgerd. They weren't on the station anymore. They were somewhere between the heart of the gas giant and the edge of the galaxy. "Look," Lyra's voice whispered. Silas opened his eyes. They were standing in a place of impossible beauty, a crystalline city built into the rings of a distant sun. But as he looked down at his own hands, he realized something terrifying. He was flickering. He was becoming translucent. The transition was too much for a human body. He was literally breaking apart at the molecular level. "Lyra," he gasped, falling to his knees as the light began to leak out of his skin. I can't stay." The pain wasn't sharp. It was expansive. Silas felt as though his very essence was being poured into a sea of infinite data. His memories, the smell of his father's old flight jacket, the grit of a desert training camp, the cold metallic taste of recycled ship air, were bleeding out of him, turning into shimmering threads of light. "Silas, stay with me." Lyra's voice was a desperate anchor, but even she looked terrified. They were in the Ethelgardian sanctuary, a realm where thought dictated reality. For an Ethelgardian, this was home. For a human, it was a biological impossibility. Silas's DNA was literally unspooling, unable to maintain its structure in a dimension made of pure psionic energy. He was a creature of clay and carbon trying to survive in a world of ghosts and starlight. I can't breathe the light, Lyra," Silas choked out. His legs were already gone, replaced by a swirling mist of golden particles. Behind them, the gateway they had used was still open, a jagged tear in reality. And through that tear, the UEF wasn't giving up. They had deployed a reality anchor probe. The massive, spiked machine pushed through the portal, dragging the cold, harsh physics of the material world with it. It began to gray out the crystalline city, turning the vibrant Ethelgardian sanctuary into a dull, lifeless limestone. Admiral Kincaid's voice bled through the rift, distorted and monstrous. "Target, localized, stabilize the dimension, bring them back. In pieces if necessary." The probe began to emit a high-frequency pulse that acted like a vacuum for psionic energy. Lyra screamed, her silver skin flickering as the machine began to drain her very life force. The sanctuary was collapsing. The bridge was falling. Silas looked at his disappearing hands. He looked at Lyra, who was being pulled toward the reality anchor like a leaf in a hurricane. In that moment, the Iceman found a new kind of coldness, not the cold of indifference, but the absolute frozen clarity of a soldier's sacrifice. Humans are adaptable, he thought. That is our greatest strength. He didn't try to pull himself back together. Instead, he did the opposite. He pushed his consciousness further out. He embraced the dissolution. If he was turning into energy, then he would become the exact kind of energy the Ethelgardian sanctuary needed to survive. "Lyra!" Silas roared, his voice now a chorus of 1,000 echoes. "Stop fighting the drain. Use me. I am the fuel. I am the human factor." He threw himself, all that remained of his shimmering, golden self, into the Empress. He didn't just link with her, he merged with her. He became the raw, stubborn, primitive willpower that the elegant Ethelgardians lacked. He gave her the human instinct to survive at any cost, the instinct that allowed a bunch of hairless apes to conquer the stars. The Empress's eyes snapped open. They weren't just white stars anymore. They were burning with a fierce, Terran orange. She stood up, defying the pull of the reality anchor. With a scream that cracked the very foundations of the sanctuary, she unleashed a wave of human-infused psychic power. It wasn't a gentle wave. It was a kinetic sledgehammer. The UEF probe didn't just deactivate, it imploded. The feedback loop traveled back through the rift, blowing the sensors on the Iron Duke and forcing the gateway to slam shut with the force of a collapsing star. The silence that followed was absolute. Lyra collapsed onto the crystalline floor, gasping for air. She was whole. She was safe, but she was alone. The golden mist that had been Silas Thorne was gone. There was no body, no spirit, just a lingering warmth in the air that smelled of ozone and jasmine. "Silas," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Silas, come back. You promised." She reached out into the psychic ether, searching for even a flicker of his mind. But there was nothing. The man who had fallen in love with her at first sight had given every atom of his existence to ensure she would live to see another. But then, the floor began to vibrate. Not with an explosion, but with a heartbeat. The heartbeat didn't come from the ground. It came from the very air itself. Slowly, the golden mist that had been scattered across the sanctuary began to pull inward. It didn't reform into a man of flesh and blood, not yet. It formed a silhouette, a shimmering outline of a human soldier. The Guardian sanctuary hadn't destroyed Silas Thorne, it had archived him. And because Lyra had held onto the core of his soul, the sanctuary was now printing him back into existence, using her memory as the blueprint. With a final brilliant flash of light, Silas slumped onto the floor. He gasped, his lungs burning as they tasted oxygen for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He was human again mostly. His eyes now held a permanent flicker of that starlight violet, a mark of the man who had crossed the threshold and returned. Lyra didn't say a word. She threw herself into his arms, her head buried in his chest, listening to the frantic, beautiful thumping of his heart. "You're late," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "Space traffic," Silas managed to joke, his voice raspy. "It's a nightmare." They stood together on the balcony of the hidden city, looking out at the vast, peaceful expanse of the Guardian home world. The war had been averted. The Iron Duke had been forced to retreat, its systems fried and its mission compromised by a power it couldn't comprehend. Back on Earth, the story would be told of a hero who disappeared to save a goddess, and a peace treaty that was signed not in ink, but in the light of a shared soul. Silas looked at the Empress, the woman he had loved before he even knew her name. The diplomatic mission was over, but their story was just beginning. Humanity had finally found its match, not in technology or weapons, but in the one thing they thought was their greatest weakness, their capacity to feel. "What happens now?" Silas asked, looking toward the horizon where two suns were rising. Lyra took his hand, her fingers locking with his. "Now, Captain, we show the galaxy that when a human falls in love, the stars themselves have no choice but to listen. I really hope you enjoyed this journey through the stars. If you want to see more epic tales of human bravery and alien wonder, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel HFY Scape. Your support keeps these stories alive. What would you do if you realized an alien could read your every thought? Let me know in the comments below.